A federal case against migrants accused of attacking ICE agents in Minneapolis collapses. Two ICE agents accused of lying about what happened. Now they could face criminal charges. Funding for TSA, FEMA, and other parts of Homeland Security expires tonight. No deal in sight. Florida Democrat Debbie Wasserman Schultz joins us to discuss. Something big is happening. 70 million views and counting. This viral essay argued artificial intelligence will soon devour white-collar jobs and possibly much more. We discuss. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Public safety, national security. Governments invoke both because they are core missions and because they can be used to defend measures that, absent true threats to public safety or national security, a free society might reject or oppose. The Trump administration has used both terms to defend aggressive internal immigration enforcement. Moreover, it has used harsh rhetoric to describe people who have protested or in any way interfered with enforcement actions. In some cases, this administration has brought federal charges, alleging that violent crimes have been committed against agents, and even saying those offenses may have justified the use of lethal force. In this context, something very important happened today. Federal charges of violence against immigration agents lodged against two Venezuelan immigrants stemming from an incident on January 4th, where one of the immigrants was shot after agents accused them of using shovels as weapons. Well, those charges have now been dropped with prejudice, meaning they can never be brought again. Then something else happened. Todd Lyons, the acting director of ICE, said two ICE agents may have lied about that incident, the one that led to the federal charges being filed. Those two agents were placed on administrative leave. Lyons said in a statement, and I quote, "Lying under oath is a serious federal offense. The officers may face termination of employment, as well as potential criminal prosecution," end quote. This is a significant reversal. How significant? Well, by way of comparison, this is what DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said about the incident that led to the charges against the Venezuelans.
Our ICE agents are following the law and running their operations according to training. Last night, what we saw was three individuals weaponize shovels and brooms and attack an ICE officer that had to defend himself. But I would say that our agent is beat up, he's bruised, he's injured, he's getting treatment, and we're thankful that he made it out alive.
None of that in reference to this January 14th incident appears to be true. Lawyers for both migrants welcomed the dismissal of charges and said acknowledgement of misstatements was equally welcome. Situations can become confused for law enforcement, and it's worth noting that that work carries risks that no reasonable person can overlook or dismiss. But blanket assertions and snap judgments carry risks of their own and can intensify a sense of fear among law enforcement that can take on a danger of its own. The cases of Renee Good, whose death preceded by 7 days the encounter with the Venezuelans, and Alex Preddy, whose death occurred 10 days later, vividly underscore this inherent peril. That's why this moment matters, because it may herald a potentially new dimension of immigration enforcement, where there is accountability on both sides of the ledger. We begin with our Camila Montoya Galvez in New York and Nicole Skanga here with me at the desk. Camila, let me start with you. Remind our audience of what this was all about on January 14th.
Good evening, Major. That is completely right. In mid-January, a week after the killing of Minneapolis resident Renee Good, when tensions were really high in that region of the country, the Department of Homeland Security issued a sweeping and categorical statement accusing three Venezuelan men, including one who was shot by an ICE officer, of, quote, violently assaulting law enforcement with a shovel and a broom handle in an attempt to evade arrest and obstruct law enforcement. Subsequently, the Justice Department moved to charge criminally two of the men on allegations that they impeded the ICE officer and also assaulted him. But earlier this week, as you underscored, the Justice Department moved to dismiss and drop those charges, citing newly discovered evidence that it says is materially inconsistent with the initial allegations made against the two Venezuelan men. And now today, acting ICE Director Todd Lyons, who rarely issues statements with his name on them, is saying that video of the incident shows and indicates that the two officers involved in the incident made false statements or appeared to have lied during sworn testimony about the case. In addition to being suspended, the two officers are now under investigation criminally and also potentially by ICE on an administrative basis, Major. And after that process concludes, Lyons says that the officers could be terminated completely from ICE and also potentially criminally prosecuted. So it is a way for ICE right now, amid growing discontent with the agency's actions, to project the message that it is trying to hold people accountable inside the agency who are alleged to have engaged in misconduct. Major.
Nicole, you were in Minneapolis. Camila referred to how tense things were. You experienced that firsthand. But what happened in this case is not an isolated incident. There have been other instances where charges have been leveled in this context and then later dropped.
Yeah, we saw the same thing, and I was on the ground in Minnesota, but also on the ground during Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago when Marimar Martinez was shot 5 times. She was accused by the federal government in a court of law of assaulting federal law enforcement, and later those charges were dropped, very similar to what we see here with Operation Metro Serve, and charges dropped against these 2 Venezuelan men who were the targets of this immigration operation. Multiple recent cases involving federal immigration agents' use of force have seen charges fall apart, or they've been reevaluated when evidence didn't support the government's initial claim. And it raises questions about how some of these operations, Major, are being justified. And it is the reason that during a hearing on Capitol Hill yesterday, we heard from a Republican, Senator Rand Paul, who grilled top DHS officials about credible investigations into Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And he said, quote, "Nobody believes you're going to because you made conclusions immediately."
And Camilo, to this point, it has been said by critics of these aggressive interior enforcement actions that until now, or until very recently, ICE and DHS have basically said, not that we're unaccountable, but they're not interested in allegations of potential wrongdoing. This suggests a reevaluation of that.
Yeah, and it also goes to show, Major, that the administration has been facing increasing and escalating political pressure on immigration enforcement during the 2024 presidential campaign. And early on in his administration, President Trump's mass deportation agenda was, on a net basis, supported by a majority of Americans. Now, it is deeply unpopular in many sectors of the country, especially when it comes to questions around tactics and also the strategy that ICE and Border Patrol agents are employing across the country. And there are also questions about, like Nicole underscored, the actual credibility and also accuracy of the statements that the Department of Homeland Security is putting out, and that top administration officials like Secretary Noem, Border Patrol Commander official Gregor Bavino are making in really high-stakes situations, including after the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Border Patrol agent Bavino even said at one point during a nationally televised press conference that Preddy was trying to massacre federal agents without citing any evidence and before a full investigation was underway. And that statement was directly contradicted hours later by video of the incident, witness statements, and later, subsequently, by a government report. So this is part of a broader trend that the administration is facing, and it seems that they are now recognizing that some of these actions and statements are becoming too politically toxic. And I think the decision to stop the operation in Minneapolis is a recognition of that, Major.
And Nicole, very quickly, quite separate from the politics, when an announcement like the acting director of ICE, Todd Lyons, makes today sends a signal to others who are doing this work.
These agents were not just placed on administrative leave. There is a criminal probe that has been opened with potential for prosecution, Major, and that is different than what we've seen in the past. That is a signal to every man and every woman in uniform that you are not operating with impunity.
Nicole Skanga, Camila Montoya Galvez, thank you so very much for starting us off tonight. I really appreciate it. Nicole Killian joins me now from Capitol Hill. As I said at the top, there's an imminent partial government shutdown, a very small part of the government, but an important and noticeable one. Nicole, walk us through where we are.
Well, where we are is that we're the only ones here right now, Major. There are no lawmakers really to be found here because they adjourned yesterday, both in the Senate and the House. Of course, the Senate did make some attempts to vote on funding for the Department of Homeland Security, both a long-term funding patch and a short-term funding patch. Both failed, and so here we are today with the agency poised to shut down. Obviously, this comes as Senate Democrats have been negotiating with the White House over the terms of what you just discussed there with Nicole and Camilo, the conduct of these federal immigration agents. And so there have been offers that have been going back and forth, but Democrats want to see some type of legislative commitment before they greenlight additional funding to ICE and other agencies, including the entire Department of Homeland Security. A short time ago, I asked House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries where things stand. Take a listen.
Just to be clear, can you just walk us through next steps? So are Democrats going to present another offer to the White House? Are you expecting another counter offer back? Or at this point, do you want a direct meeting with the president to try to close the deal?
We haven't called for a direct meeting at this point, but again, we're ready to sit down with anyone, anytime, any place, if they are serious about the types of dramatic reforms that are necessary to get ICE under control.
So as you heard the leader there say, no direct talks on tap with the president and congressional Democrats, but he did note that congressional Democrats are, in his words, working feverishly to respond to the White House's latest counteroffer. So again, you know, one positive thing, even if the Department of Homeland Security shuts down, is that the lines of communication appear to still be open, that these negotiations continue, and, you know, lawmakers readily acknowledge that they are willing to come back here to Capitol Hill if a deal is ultimately secured.
Nicole Killian from Capitol Hill, thank you very much. We turn now to the search for Nancy Guthrie. The FBI is now calling the subject in the surveillance video more than that, calling them now a suspect. The agency has also released its first description of the alleged kidnapper. CBS News' Andres Gutierrez joins us now from Tucson. Andres, catch us up.
Well, Major, this remains a massive and active investigation. We are now 13 days into the search, and it is far from being cold. The Pima County Sheriff ended up talking to Jonathan Vigliotti just a short time ago. It is the first time that we're hearing from the sheriff in over a week. Last Thursday was the last time we heard from him during a news conference. Today, he says there are at least 400 members of law enforcement who are on the ground, local, state, federal, working this case. Authorities say that they have received more than 30,000 calls and tips since this all began. The sheriff is pushing back on reports that there are tensions between his office and the FBI, saying that the two agencies are working side by side. He did point out that the physical evidence from the scene has been sent to a contracted lab, that lab reportedly out in Florida, while the digital evidence as well as the ransom notes are being held by the FBI. Investigators did recover gloves during a search of Nancy's neighborhood. A pair was found about 1.5 miles away from here, and those have also been sent out for testing. Authorities confirm that they have received some DNA evidence results back, but none of them have led to a name for this suspect. And the sheriff says that there has been no signs of life, but there has also been no signs of death. And so no arrests yet. The suspect, again, has not been named yet. And so right now, this all remains a huge operation here in northern Tucson, Major.
Andres Gutierrez, thank you so very much. And an interesting programming note. Pay attention. Right after this show, the Daily Report will devote its entire show to the search for Nancy Guthrie. Our team of reporters and law enforcement experts will join Lindsay Ryder for this very special edition. You can watch that tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz opened this year's Munich Security Conference with a message to the United States saying Americans are, quote, not powerful enough to go at it alone. Earlier today, the German leader met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The two leaders' central focus, the war in Ukraine. CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd joins me now. Sam, always great to have you. So a couple of things that happened there. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, was there, said that there needs to be a ceasefire, that only President Trump can pressure the Russians to do that. And if there is a ceasefire of maybe 2 or 3 months in duration, he would be open to elections. That sounded to me like interesting news.
It's newsy. I think it's a negotiating tactic. Zelensky is trying to negotiate a bit in public to his primary customer, who is President Trump, to a certain degree, and to signal that he's willing to make concessions to hold elections not early, but during the course of a ceasefire versus when the war actually ends. The problem is, who is Donald Trump actually listening to? It's likely Vladimir Putin and not Zelensky, and that was newsworthy. I think the bigger piece that I'm watching in Munich right now is whether we are at what the president of CFR, Michael Froman, says is a fork in the road when it comes to the transatlantic alliance. You have the United States showing up, a very different delegation than last year. J.D. Vance came in with a wrecking ball. Marco Rubio has a different personality. But there is certainly a message being sent by the United States that Europe should be going in alone, that Europe should be providing for more of its own defense, and that Europe is overregulated and behind the curve on so many things. And so the question is really whether the European leaders are using this Munich Security Forum to continue balancing against the United States versus balancing with us.
And the president was just asked upon his arrival near Mar-a-Lago this afternoon about Iran. He said the talks are going on and was asked, are you in favor of regime change? And he said something to the effect of it might not be a bad idea. And then he was asked reasonably by a reporter, well, who would replace the regime? He said, I don't know, but there are people. Put that in context with everything else that's going on in terms of military assets moving closer and closer to Iran.
We're actually having additional military assets move closer to Iran with one of the large military strike groups that was off the coast of Venezuela, now transitioning back aircraft carrier to the CENTCOM area of responsibility. Look, when it comes to regime change, President Trump clearly is supportive of that. We saw that happen in Venezuela. We have also seen a lack of a transition plan or a plan B in places like Venezuela. I think he is publicly wobbling a little bit on what his ultimate goal is vis-a-vis Iran, not only because President Trump loves to create an era of uncertainty. Right. He views that as leverage. For me, what's most important is what's happening behind the scenes on the diplomatic track, certainly, and whether and when there are covert action operations being planned to try to influence members of the regime or the military and security forces during this critical time. And CNN, Christiane Amanpour did interview Reza Pahlavi about whether he would like to become the next leader of Iran. So a lot of pieces in play here.
Very quickly, there was a report that there was an attempt by the United States to covertly get Starlink materials into Iran. There was also a report I saw that Iran seized that. Do we have any clarity about what did or didn't happen in this space? Because it matters to what the Iranians hear or can transmit about what's actually going on in terms of protesters being killed by the regime.
We don't have clarity yet. I would imagine the United States is using covert action tools to try to let the Iranian people express themselves. So I imagine we'll hear more.
I'm sure we will.
Thanks.
And when we do, you'll be here to help us understand it.
Thanks, Major.
Sam Vinograd, as always, thank you very much. Still to come on The Takeout, Florida Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, her view on the imminent DHS, that is Department of Homeland Security, partial government shutdown. Also, could artificial intelligence kill more jobs than the COVID pandemic? Well, of course, jobs bounce back after COVID, but they might not after this. We look at the viral essay with a very stark jobs-related warning. Plus, weak or extreme, the new CBS News poll shows what Americans think about their own party and which words they use to describe it. Our political reporter panel will weigh on that. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. As Nicole Killian pointed out just a few moments ago, conversations between Republicans and Democrats to avert partial government shutdown, dealing with DHS funding, pretty much stalled. So let's bring in someone who might give us some insight on where this might be all heading. Democratic Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Congresswoman, always good to talk to you. You're pretty read in on the Democratic cloakroom, Democratic leadership. What are going to be the absolute must-haves in the context of these negotiations with the Trump administration to get enough votes to fully fund the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, Major, thanks for having me. And the bottom line is anything that we do to fund DHS cannot have the support of Democrats until they are reined in. ICE is completely out of control. We have to make sure that the masks come off because people in this country have the right to face their accuser. Folks have to know with name tags who it is that is trying to detain them. We have to have judicial warrants because we cannot have masked thugs with battering rams, bashing down people's doors, showing up at people's houses, claiming to be representatives of law enforcement, of ICE. Who knows whether they are? These are people, in many cases, who came from countries with authoritarian regimes. That's one of the reasons that so many of them fled. So ensuring that ICE is following the law and the Constitution, and ensuring that they are reined in and have restrictions on them that are following the norms of this country and how we confront people that we're accusing of violating the law is absolutely essential before any funding is authorized.
Let's dig into that a little bit, Congresswoman. You've written and drafted legislation. I've certainly watched it in the drafting process. Words really matter. And you know the administration will push back and say, Congresswoman, we can't say that there can never be masks and they always have to have badges on because some of these operations are inherently dangerous. Some immigrants in this country without authorization may well be members of gangs, may have weapons, may be dangerous, and we may need to do this on an undercover basis. Writing that in legislation is very difficult. How do you address a concern like that?
Because that's exactly what law enforcement does in this country every single day. We had a hearing yesterday in the Steering and Policy Committee on this very topic, and the chief of police for Minneapolis testified. And when she was asked directly whether or not her officers have masks on, no. Name tags on so they can be identified, yes. Body cameras, body-worn cameras, so that what happens in their interactions is on video. Also, yes. I mean, obviously, no one can suggest that law enforcement all across this country doesn't face dangerous criminals every single day. Why on earth would it be different for people who are working for ICE? These are undertrained individuals who have been just thrown out there on the streets. They are acting like thugs. I mean, we've seen not only Renee Good and Alex Preddy murdered on the street just for protesting and expressing their First Amendment right, but a woman who was disabled dragged out of her car. In my community, they're stopping lawn trucks just because people have brown skin or Hispanic accents. If you're stopping people with Hispanic accents just because of how they sound in this community, that's all you're going to be doing all day long. And that's outrageous and unacceptable and not how ICE should be conducting business.
You made reference to a judicial warrant that has historically been the means by which any immigration enforcement can enter a property. The administration argues if there is a deportation order, that is sufficient because that has been judicially adjudicated. I'd like your response to that.
Prior to this administration, judicial warrants were utilized. People went before judges. The really serious problem we have here is that Trump lied when he said that they were going to go after the worst of the worst. DHS's own numbers, Major, show that only 14% of those that ICE has detained had any kind of a criminal record. Any criminal record. The overwhelming majority of people that they're detaining are simply trying to make a better way of life for themselves or their families. In fact, many of them, whether they had TPS or have applied for asylum, are actually following the rules and are not undocumented. And I mean, this is just an indiscriminate, outrageous, egregious violation of our Constitution and our laws. And it is the most reasonable thing in the world to just insist that an agency like ICE that has law enforcement authority follow the law and not get any more funding. They have $75 billion in extra funding that they got through the big ugly law last summer. That's as much as the entire military budget for the nation of Turkey. So they are very well funded. They don't even need any more until we can rein them in.
So it sounds to me, Congresswoman, that you're telling my audience that this is going to go on for a while, and that means TSA, FEMA, not implicated by what ICE is doing, are going to have to work without a paycheck.
Well, that's up to the Republicans, because I know the overwhelming majority of Americans have watched in horror what happened on the streets of Minneapolis and what is happening and playing out in cities across this country. People are appalled at the way ICE is conducting themselves. 3,000 ICE enforcement agents on the streets in Minneapolis, I'm glad they've been pulled back. But the president trying to use the military, our National Guard, in cities across the country, the court slapped that down because that was a violation of our Constitution. I mean, why can't we just have an administration that enforces the immigration law and lets people go through the process and ensures that we do go after the worst of the worst? I'm for that. I think we should deport criminals. And if that's the way that Trump carries out his immigration enforcement policy, that is fine with me. But what is not fine is that they are engaged in authoritarian practices that are like the regimes that so many of these folks fled, and like our founding fathers wrote into the Constitution that it was not going to be allowed, that the government was going to be able to just bust down your door and drag you out of your house without getting a warrant signed by a judge. That's what the system of checks and balances is about. And they're not following that because they just want to do it any old way they feel like it.
Florida Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for your time.
Good to be with you.
The viral essay that warns something big is happening. That was the title of it. We discussed the world of rapidly developing artificial intelligence and why some experts are sounding a pretty loud alarm. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to Takeout. Welcome to the Conversation Corner. Something big is happening. That was the title of an essay that has exploded on social media. It was written by a CEO of an AI company. His name is Matt Schumer. And he likens this current moment to February 2020, right before the start of COVID. Now, COVID and AI are not the same. But what he says is artificial intelligence is now unrecognizable. This is a quote from what existed even 6 months ago. And he urges everyone to prepare for its advancement, going on to write, quote, given what the latest models can do, the capability for massive disruption could be here by the end of this year. And that's the connection with COVID, just massive disruptions that people don't necessarily see coming. Nate Soares joins me now. He's coming to us from his hotel room at the Munich Security Conference, staying up late with us, and I appreciate that. He co-wrote, you might remember this because he was on the program before, a book called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies, Why Superhuman AI Would Kill Us All. Nate, do you accept and agree with the central premise in Matt's essay?
Something big is definitely happening. You know, it's not entirely clear that it'll all come to a head inside of 6 months, but it's not entirely clear it won't. We don't really know how fast this technology is going to move, and it's been moving fast recently.
And what Matt argued in this essay is that for the first time, OpenAI and Anthropic's new versions of their AI models coded themselves and taught themselves. If I have the language proper there.
Yeah, they helped in the creation of the next generation. And, you know, right now they only helped a little. But if the AIs can start building quite a lot of the next generation of AIs, you're looking at the possibility of a feedback loop where one AI builds a smarter AI that builds a smarter AI. That could make things go very fast, much faster than people have any ability to handle.
And this essay goes on to say that if you work in law, finance, medicine, accounting, consulting, writing, design, customer service, your job is more threatened than you currently realize.
I think that's true. I think there's a lot of jobs that are going to be disrupted probably fairly soon. I also think, you know, if we do get these AIs building smarter AIs, we're looking at something much bigger than just a lot of people losing jobs.
Please continue, because I know that's the thrust of your book.
Yeah, I mean, the title doesn't bury the lead, but I think, you know, one thing people don't understand about AI is that it has grown more like an organism rather than being crafted like traditional software. So even the people creating it don't understand what's going on inside there. And they're quick to admit this, although this is often poorly understood outside the field. And growing an AI to be super intelligent when you have no idea what's going on inside there, this is a recipe for disaster. It's not that it's impossible to somehow, you know, make machines that are both very smart and very good. It's that if you're just growing a super intelligence nobody understands, that straightforwardly leads to disaster.
So I wanted to get your evaluation of this, Nate. You know this, a top safety researcher at Anthropic recently resigned, saying he was leaving that job to go write poetry. In leaving, he wrote this, and please bring this up, Control Room. The world is in peril. And not just from AI or bioweapons, but from a whole series of interconnected crises unfolding in this very moment. We appear to be approaching a threshold where our wisdom must grow in equal measure to our capacity to affect the world, lest we face the consequences. How would you evaluate that?
You know, there's a joke in Silicon Valley that when people leave a normal company, they say, "Oh, you know, I've had fun here. I'm now moving on to the next adventure." And when people leave an AI company, they say, you know, "Oh, I've stared into the abyss and like hug your family close. You know, I'm going to go write poetry, and we've got a lot of problems to face." Why is that? I mean, I think a lot of it is that the people building the AIs are spooked. No one knows better than they do that they have no idea what's going on inside these things. It's a scary time, and you know, I think people building the AIs know it best.
And you are correct, Nate, when you said the title of your book does not bury the lead. But we talked about this, and I want you to underscore it in this conversation. We are not, individually or as a society, powerless. We can do things to erect guardrails. Walk my audience through your analysis of that potentiality.
That's absolutely right. A first big thing to notice is that putting a stop to the race to superintelligence, it wouldn't require stopping the self-driving cars. It wouldn't require giving up the medical tech. It wouldn't require shutting down ChatGPT. It just requires stopping the race to superintelligence that nobody understands. And these AIs are trained using a huge amount of highly specialized computer chips that can only be built using technology. It's very hard to make. There's very few of these lithography machines anywhere in the world. This would, in some sense, be much easier to control than nuclear proliferation. You know, uranium is a rock you dig out of the ground. AI chips take the entire supply chain to make. And the other big thing to notice about why we have a real shot here is most of the world leaders have not understood how dangerous this is. People in Silicon Valley are spooked. The people leaving these jobs have stared into the void. They're spooked. People in DC, they still sort of think that AI is just, you know, something that's going to automate art and make it harder to do education, which are real issues, but they're not spooked. They're not seeing this huge danger. And I think it would be very foolish to give up on stopping it before our leaders have even noticed the problem.
You're at the Munich Security Conference, I'm sure, for a reason. What is the tenor and tone of the conversation, if there's any there, in this space?
You know, they invited me to give some remarks, which is progress. I think they still aren't quite grappling with the possibility of AIs that are much smarter than any human, or at least they're not grappling out loud. But there have been a few people at this conference who have noticed me and recognized me and confided in me that they like the book and that they're worried themselves. And then once their turn to speak, they say, you know, platitudes that don't really acknowledge the possibilities here. And you know, I know that they're worried. So it's good they invited me. It's, you know, there's at least one person here talking about these issues, and I think the tides are maybe starting to change.
Nate, I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate you staying up and your availability. This show will constantly be peering into this, whatever it is, abyss, void, potential, I'm not sure, but we'll turn to you many times to help us understand where we are and where we might be heading. Nate Soares, thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me.
The midnight deadline that lawmakers, well, they're not going to meet it. That's been pretty evident all this show. So how do we get to this stalemate for funding for the Department of Homeland Security? And more importantly, how do we get out of it? Well, our political reporter panel will try to offer some idea about those answers when we come back here in the Takeout. Welcome back to the Takeout. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Maryland Democratic Governor Wes Moore, one of two Democrats President Trump is excluding from the annual governor's dinner at the White House next week. Moore is currently the only black governor in the United States, and some of the Democratic Party consider him kind of a rising star, possibly a 2028 presidential candidate. Well, here is what Governor Moore told our Nora O'Donnell about Trump saying he was not worthy of an invite.
I do want to be clear to the president respectfully. You do not determine my worthiness. God determines my worthiness. The people of Maryland determine my worthiness. They are who I answer to, not him. And I have been very clear with the people of my state that I will work with anyone, but I will bow down to no one. And I think the president has a problem with that.
You can catch Governor Moore on our CBS News Things That Matter Town Hall this Sunday, February 15th at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on CBS. It will also stream, of course, on Paramount+. I want to bring in our reporter panel. Riley Rogerson covers politics for Notice. That's News of the U.S. Sophia Kai, White House reporter for Politico. So I want to play for you both sound bites from this Sunday's Face the Nation. Ed O'Keefe is substituting for our colleague Margaret Brennan. He talked to Tom Tillis about the future of Kevin Warsh, nominated to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Control room, please play that.
You reiterated this week you're going to block any confirmation hearings for a new Federal Reserve chairman or board member until the Justice Department's investigation of Jerome Powell is, as you put it, resolved. But will there be confirmation hearings for Kevin Warsh even if this DOJ investigation into Powell is continuing?
Well, let's make the distinction between a confirmation hearing and then a confirmation markup. Mr. Walsh is going to have to decide whether or not he wants to go through with this because, as I'm sure you know, once the nominee is put forward, there are certain restrictions on what he can do in his business life. But I've tried to make it very clear that I have no intention of supporting any confirmation of any Fed board member, chair or otherwise, to fill the Kugler seat, for example, until this is resolved. I think we had a young U.S. attorney with a dream trying to get the president's attention, not even consulting with the administration and big DOJ on something that maybe they thought they'd get brownie points for. It's not cute. And if this is only about 2 minutes of discussion that came before Chair Powell, that prosecutor should listen to the 7 members, Republican members, who said they didn't see any criminal intent or activity. And more importantly, the prosecutor should understand that the protocol normally would be a referral from the chair or a member of the committee to say, we think a crime was committed here. We've got a crime scene where 7 Republican members say no crime was committed. How hard is that to understand?
Riley, that's pretty definitive and could gum this up quite considerably.
Absolutely. And we have a running joke on Capitol Hill that Tom Tillis is unleashed now that he is not running for re-election. And I think we're seeing a taste of that with this Jerome Powell investigation and his firm opposition against it. Tom Tillis, because he's not running, has been freed up to really speak his mind and come out firmly against the Trump administration on a number of topics.
For the audience's benefit, Riley, can he alone stop this?
He can slow this down significantly, yes, in the banking committee. So his opposition is a big, big deal in order to get Warsh installed at the Fed.
Sophia, you and several of your colleagues had some fascinating reporting about a topic that we opened our show with, which is immigration broadly and enforcement. And many federal judges rejecting assertions made in that context by this administration, and a not insubstantial number.
More than 300 judges appointed by presidents dating all the way back to Reagan, every single president. Actually, 44 judges appointed by President Trump, most in his first term, have also rejected this policy. So it really just, it goes to show you that even if you've placed judges that you think may be favorable, you still have no control. You know, you don't have absolute control over how they rule. And in this case, judges are mostly ruling against mandatory detention. Because they don't find it constitutionally sufficient on the grounds that the administration keeps arguing in each of these cases, yes.
Right. And for our audience's benefit, there is a process in the Senate for judicial confirmation, lower bench, blue slip. Democrats have to be involved in that process. The president denounces that all the time. But you found in your reporting, this is even true for federal district or appellate judges appointed from red states or coming from red states.
Absolutely.
So the Constitution is the Constitution, and they're reading it in a very certain way. And they say in these rulings, the administration is not.
Yeah, and I think, look, I think this administration, they have tried to push the law. In many cases, you know, they do something until they can no longer get away with it. And, you know, what my colleague Kyle Cheney and our reporting shows is that, you know, there's only so much runway that you have until you start getting reined in by the courts. So I referred to this earlier. We have some CBS News polling about words that people within political parties use to describe their political parties. And we'll put the Republican numbers up first. And there's a lot of things you would expect there. Republicans think their party is reasonable, strong, effective. 24% consider it extreme. 16% consider it weak. Okay, that's conforms with my expectation. All right, let's go to the Democratic numbers.
88% think that's reasonable. That's not a surprise to me. However, 45% of Democrats consider their own party weak, exactly the same number as strong. And 45%, less than 50, consider it effective. That surprised me. Riley?
That number totally jumped off the page to me as well. And it brought to mind something that California Governor Gavin Newsom has been talking about with the Democratic Party, is they need to project strength. And I think his assessment would fall in line with that. Right now, the Democratic Party is projecting a lot of weakness. And I think we're going to see more and more of these 2028 contenders, people like Wes Moore, Gavin Newsom, do what they can, whether it's on social media or in this redistricting fight, to just project strength.
Sophia, 30 seconds.
Like him or not, people believe that Trump is a figure who projects strength, even if you disagree with his policy.
Sure. And some of this question about weakness or not may play out in this DHS snarl.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Democrats are going to have to say, we are strong on this, as
Yes.
opposed to being weak and caving as we did before, as was many Democrats said about them. All right, Riley Rogerson, Sophia Kai, control room, tell me what we're doing. I'm going to read the Olympic tease. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for that help, control room. Next, a U.S. figure skating phenom falls well, and I emphasize the word falls, well short of expectations. A look at the quad gods Olympic, well, disaster may not be too strong a word. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to Takeout. This is not freestyle skiing or freestyle skating. It's just freestyle anchoring. Kelly O'Grady at the Milan Winter Olympics has just gotten to our live shot position from where Ilya Malinin was competing in ice skating. She has the details. Kelly, please take it away.
Major, I ran here. It was my own version of an Olympic event to give you this news because this was one of the most shocking moments of the Games. Ilya Malinin expected to take gold. The quad god proved that he is human tonight. He finished in 8th, walking away with no medal. This was, Major, I think the closest thing to a lock on a gold medal that the U.S. had at this Games. The pressure, the expectations did prove too much afterwards. Malinin said, "I blew it." And just to kind of give you a sense of what was happening during the performance, he fell multiple times. He popped a couple of jumps in figure skating. That means instead of rotating fully that quad, he only rotated 1 or 2 times, of course, losing major points. And this was a night where it really felt like no male skater was skating to win. It was littered with mistakes. And I just, halfway through, something beautiful happened, even though there was a horrible thing happening on the ice for Ilya, so young to experience this. The crowd got behind him, and there were people from all over the world, Major, not just Americans, because they saw someone having one of the worst moments of their life and one of the most important moments of their life, and they cheered, and he fought through it. It unfortunately wasn't enough, but that really stuck with me, Major, just the crowd trying to lift him up in such a tough moment.
And Kelly, we've got 40 seconds, so I just want you to answer me this. Before the crowd rallied to the quad gods' emotional defense, the gasps must have been audible.
They were, and in fact, there were watch parties. There was a watch party at Malinin's university that he attends, and we had a camera there that they just absolutely gasped in horror, just marking that moment.
Kelly O'Grady, a gold medalist on this program every single time she appears, especially tonight, racing across Milan to get there for this live shot. Kelly O'Grady, thank you so very much. Happy Friday, everyone. Pink shirt today. That's in honor of Valentine's Day. If you're so inclined, have a great Valentine's Day weekend. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report in its special context coming up next.